Hello, and welcome to this interview with Gwynneth Green, one of our artists presently on display at the Alfa Art Gallery's current exhibition, Shifted Nature. We'll be going over some of her artistic process as well as the pieces that she's graciously contributed to our physical and online presentations. We'll start off pretty simple. How are you doing today?
Great. How are you, Chris? I welcome you to my home, and aren't we lucky the weather's finally changed?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to be here. Now we'll dive right into your work because you are both a photographer and a poet. Can you detail a little bit more about what led you to uniting these two mediums into one, especially since they sort of inform each other in your work?
Yes, well, my path really started in poetry. I really believe it's a gift I received from my grandfather, Bud Green, who was a famed lyricist, and I have a very long history, but I won't go into all those details right now. I started writing ekphrastic poems over 10 years ago. Now, these poems are inspired by other people's artwork and or photography. I've even at times done series of poems connected to an artist's series of photographs. I began putting the poems, some of the poems, into photos, and I would put the whole poem in and displayed them for online for friends. Everybody enjoyed them. But over a year ago, a very close friend who's an artist suggested that I use my own photos to inspire poems. Now, that's something I had never done, and I really wasn't sure how that would work at all. I didn't quite get the idea of taking photos with an actual purpose. I thought that would be more forcing the issue and forcing something that I really think is natural to me. So instead of starting off with taking photos, I decided, well, I know I've taken a lot of photos over the years. Let me see what I have. And I sat at the computer and I went through all these old photos over years and years and found I had really quite a collection of photos that actually might inspire me to write. So I began, looking over them just one at a time. But at the same time, I did start taking photos while I was out walking or hiking. If something caught my eye, I just took a picture of it. There was no intention in it, just figuring, well, maybe it'd be something. And then I realized I wanted to start trying to put my words into my own photos. And at first I did, and I put them out very bold into the photos. And I realized in doing so, it took away from the image. And to me, there was no point to this. So that's when I decided I needed to blend them a little more gently together. And that's what I really call the beginning of my photo musings.
Now, do you feel like viewers may read your poetry differently since it's merged with your photography? Or maybe viewers see your photography differently because they notice the blend of text?
Well, yes, of course. If you were just to read a poem on a blank page, there's no visual. And at that, you're reading it and your connection will be an emotional connection to whatever is written on the page. I've published many books. They have no images in them, and they are purely for an emotional connection. Now, maybe you connect to a poem, maybe you don't, but there is no image. In the case of my photographs, they are actually constructed to pull the viewer in. I want you to look closely at this image that I've created. And then upon getting closer and looking into it, the words then will reveal themselves. and the poetry itself has a meaning, but yet it is still connected to that visual.
Now, obviously, because of the nature of your work, all of your images will have text somewhere, typically hidden. Can you explain some of the motivation behind where and how you place the text in the image? Kind of, for example, there are stark differences in your technique with Angler's Dream and Image of the Past, kind of representing two different approaches to your typographic infusion.
Well, the motivation or the purpose of what you're saying, hiding the words, is not to distract from the image. I really want the viewer to be attracted first to my photo from across the room, to notice it and to want to take a closer look into it. And as they do get closer and they look at it, to sometimes really be surprised to find the message that's in there, that poetic flow. Now, many people are afraid of poetry, so the thought of looking into a photo to find a poem might frighten them. And they claim they don't understand poetry, they don't like it. I look at this as a very unique opportunity to change that thought, that the words in the photo speak clearly. Now, let's take Angler's Dream. Now, in that particular photo, I washed it all of color. And once I did that, it became very clear to me what the 6-word poetic flow was going to be. And wouldn't it reflect? Because we have this beautiful lake. So shouldn't the thought as well be reflected in the image itself? You mentioned another piece of mine, Image of the Past. Now that is a very interesting one for me, because that particular bench is one that my daughter and I rest upon often when we pass it on our hikes. I wanted to make sure that the wooden slats of that bench were very visible. I wanted to keep them in their natural state. So I took the rest of the photo and turned it into a monochromatic image, and then placed that bench back in place. And I needed the words to be quite subtle. So I wanted to embed them in a place where they would be seen, but they wouldn't be standing right out at you. And once I put this together, I looked at this bench and I thought, well, what does that remind me of? And I could only think of splinters. And of course, if you think of splinters, what are they doing? They pierce the skin. And that is part of that poetic flow. Many of my poems, they deal with universal emotions, and they're not about me. I write words that will connect with other people. I never interpret my pieces, for I really believe it's up to the reader or the observer to connect on their own level.
What comes first, the poem or the picture? How do these works really come to be?
Well, as I stated earlier, originally I started writing ekphrastic poems, and that therefore they were being inspired by a visual. They sparked whatever it was, they sparked my creativity. I'd see a picture and I would just suddenly go into a poetic flow. And when I began using my own images, that was the same purpose. It was to see looking at images that I'd taken, whether they would inspire me as well. And I was able to go into that direction. And sometimes I would then look back at older poems that I'd written that were not connected to anything. And I realized with these poems, I didn't want to use a whole poem in an image anymore, but I would be able to take the essence of what I had said and transfer it into either a haiku or maybe a 6-word poetic flow. And then once I had that, the challenge was, all right, where's my image? Where's my scene that I want to embed this into? And sometimes it came together quickly. I'd come across another photo or something and I go, oh, perfect marriage between these two. Let's put this together. And sometimes it took a long time. I just wait until the muse would direct me in that direction. One piece that particularly happened in that manner was one called What Matters Most. We'll talk about that a little later.
Now, another striking thing about your artwork is how you use color very selectively. Can you discuss some of your perspective on how that's significant in your work?
Well, for me, it's all about developing a feel. I want to create a mood. So therefore, I rarely will use a photograph just as it is. I'm going to use something to have the viewer focus into a particular part of the image or set a tone to the whole image. Because what I want to trap you. I want to trap you into looking into this deeper. And it's not unlike my poetry. If I can capture you in the flow, then you expose your own emotion to yourself.
Going back to the piece that you had mentioned before, What Matters Most, it really does stand out because while other works that we see in the gallery revolve more around use of color, this one uses more focus and blurs in a very pointed fashion. Can you give us a little background on this image?
As we said, What Matters Most, here is an example of where the poem came first. And it is a delightful little poem. And it talks, in a sense, about aging. And I had written this poem quite some time ago. And when I came across the actual photo that I had taken, I realized that these two were going to fit together perfectly. But again, I didn't want to use this whole poem into it. And the focus here was to blur the image, that you would only have that one area that you could see clearly. Because as we put the poetic flow together, I see it clearly, though I can't quite focus. Those are the last lines of the poem, and it really tells a story in its own few words.
Now, a lot of your works in terms of subject matter will revolve around nature. One that I personally like is Breaking Barriers with the tumbled branches and a few highlighted against the others. Is there something about the landscape that particularly draws your attention to it? Is there something that you want your viewers to think about when looking at these natural sources?
Well, yes, I have found that nature really does inspire me to write. I take walks, I let the surroundings speak to me, I keep an open mind, I keep an open eye. I'll stop to take photos with no intention. I might use them immediately, I might put them in my photo bank. I've used photos that are very old as well as the recently taken one. Now, you've asked about breaking barriers. And first, I thank you. I'm always happy to hear when one of my pieces meets with someone and touches them. So that's very special to me. But it's not up to me to decide whether someone thinks about a scene. I create it to create a mood. And if it captures the attention, then it really has succeeded in the mission. And if the merged words then bring more meaning to that image, then I really consider that a double accomplishment.
When you're in the process of creating your pieces, what do you usually think about?
I don't think. I let go of thought, and I just let the mood and the muse direct me. Now, artists of all venues speak about the muse, and it's not uncommon to hear one say they don't think about what they are creating, it just comes to them. And it really is the truth. At times, it's almost like being in a trance of some type. I've said the same to people many times, and it's really amazing to see the various reactions you get. Some people understand and look at you and nod, and then you have the other people who nod at you and look at you like, you're crazy.
Now, of all of your works, which is your favorite, or one that you may have a particular attachment to? If you don't have a favorite, just pick a piece that you want to detail a little bit more.
Well, I can't really say I have any favorites. They all mean something to me, especially when I'm working on them. That's when I'm connected to them. That's when I have my own emotional connection going. But in saying that, let's pick a piece. Let's talk about Transcendental. Now, this photo was taken again at a nearby Monmouth County park. As I said, being in the woods and in nature is very inspiring. I took the photo with no intention at the time, other than that it was really a beautiful sight. And then several days later, I took a look at it on the computer, and it became very clear to me that I needed to focus on that little bridge leading to the path in the woods. Now, in the photo, it was springtime and there was a lot of new growth, and it was very green and very bright and very beautiful. However, I didn't want any focus on any greenery. So I built the scene around that wooden bridge, taking the viewer into a meditative space. And I put just a bit of color on the tree just to give it a mystical feel. And the words were natural to the image, placing them on the boards that one would step upon. For one who practices meditation, they will understand the 6-word poetic flow. Gaps, bridged, enlightenment, expanding, experience, transcendental.
In creating these wonderful pieces and this really moving poetry, things have changed recently. So how has the COVID-19 pandemic reshaped your process, if at all? Has it impacted your work in any way?
Well, yes. Now, COVID-19, of course, has reshaped everyone's life. And a year ago, when we really all just went into lockdown, I had just really started using my own photos as inspiration. So having to live in an isolated state, anyone could really find it a depressing situation. But I used it as an excuse just to sit at my computer for more hours and learn techniques and practice and see how I could incorporate various layers into my images, taking them apart, dissecting them into all sorts of little pieces, and then reassembling them so that they would create some mood that I would feel comfortable with. Many I worked on and then I've just put aside, maybe I'll revisit them. I've spent I shouldn't say fortunately, but because of the situation that we're all in, it did give me a lot of time over this past year to actually build a big portfolio of pieces. Many of these photo musings touch upon strength and fortitude and resilience. And many of my poems from the past have also reflected on the same. My goal as a poet and as a photo musing musinger, new word. My goal really is to pass on positive energy.
Well, I think you've done a great job in all of your pieces, and I would like to thank you so much, Gwynneth. I don't have any more questions. However, if there's anything you'd like to add that you may have thought of during the interview, any new pieces you're currently working on, new shows, feel free to share.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This has been delightful. And I have been working on new pieces. I've completed a couple recently. I also must say I am very honored that I will be in a two-person exhibition, In Search of Meaning, with the Monmouth County Arts in Red Bank that will run until May. And I also have a virtual exhibition, Women in Art 2021, that's in Las Laguna Art Gallery in California. One last little fact that I would like to mention about my photo musings. They are all printed on metal, which adds another dimension and makes them frameless.
Thank you. Again, Gwynneth, thank you so much for speaking with us, sharing your insight on your creations. If you'd like to learn more about Gwynneth or the Alfa Art Gallery, you can look in the description of this video and learn more about the Alfa, more about Gwynneth. And we thank you so much for watching another installment of our interview series.